In a previous video, we have discussed scope of a variable and a function. In this video, we are going to have a look at the constants and superglobals. You may remember we've been discussing superglobals earlier, and I did say that superglobals are straight away available within the functions. You don't have to import them using a global or anything like this, but we'll get to this in just a moment. Let's start with the constant. We'll simply go into define one, so define constant called first underscore name, and the value for this constant will be simply my first name. And then let's define another one. I'm just simply copying this, and the other one is going to be last name and my surname, so Sulinski. Okay, so we have two constants here. We could obviously check first if it's defined, but just for the simplicity, I'm just going to use this define function here. Okay, so I'm going to create a new named function called getName. So function getName. And what I'm going to do with this function is basically return, and I'm going to go straight for the constant name. So first underscore name, and then I'm going to concatenate it with the space and then last name. And there we go. As you can see, they are straight away available. I don't have to do global and then use the constant name. They're straight away available here. And if I just simply echo now this function get name, we save everything, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. My full name is now displayed in the browser window. As you can see, with constants, we basically don't have to do anything like global, say, first name. This only works with variables. So with globals, with variables, with constants, we are okay. We can use them straight away inside of the function. And it doesn't matter if you go into, let's say, have another function here, get first name, and let's say we are going to return just first name, return first name. You can go as deep as you want. You can have as many embedded functions as you want. You still have access to all these constants regardless of how deep you are. So that's constants. Now let's have a look at the superglobals. Superglobals, as name suggests, are available globally, in which case obviously we're going to have the same situation as with the constants. We don't have to import them using the global keyword. So we can remove this define here for these constants, and let's try and use the get superglobal to fetch the first and last name from the URI. So first underscore name, and then we have another get superglobal with last underscore name. If we save everything and preview it in a browser, if we refresh the page with the first and last name in the URI, as you may remember, in order for us to be able to use the get superglobal, we have to have this question mark, then the variable name, equal symbol and the value associated with this variable, then and symbol to concatenate it. Basically, every single separate variable has to be concatenated with this and symbol. So we have this last name as well, equals Sulinski, and this is what we're getting. If I was to remove all this, then we're going to get the error. Basically, it's notice undefined index first name and undefined index last name, because this get superglobal doesn't see them, obviously, in the URI. So if we go back to our editor, let's now try another example. We are going to expand this a little bit. Now, rather than using get, we are going to use request superglobal. As you may remember, request fetches get, post, and cookies superglobal. So, but rather than having them basically fetch them separately as we did with the get one, we can get all three using this request. Obviously, depending on the order which your server supports, basically whether the get goes before post. Let's say we're gonna have first name superglobal, so first name variable with the get and with the post. Then on my server, the post is after the get, which means the post will override the get request. But we'll tackle this in just a moment. So let's convert both of these to the request, and what we are going to do, rather than return it straight away, what I'm going to do is create the variable f name for first name equals, and what I'm going to do is first check if this superglobal variable is actually set. So is set function, and I'm putting this request first name inside of the brackets of this is set function, and then question mark. If it is set, then after question mark, we simply return it. If it's not, and I'm going to just put this on the new line here, if it's not, so colon, I'm going to simply return no first name, and that's it. And then semicolon, because obviously this if-else statement in line. So obviously you can again have it all in line. I'm putting this on the new line. So we've got question mark for successful and for failure, basically, for this is set condition here. Now, for the next one, for this last name, we are going to simply use the variable L name for the last name. And again, the same situation. So I'm going to copy all this and is set request last name, then question mark. We are going to return this request. Let's actually indent these both as well here. Otherwise, so colon, and we are going to say no last name. And now we simply return F name concatenated the same way as before with L name. We can do it either this way, or again, you can put it all in between a double quote, and rather than having this concatenation, just simply have a space in between the double quote. Again, I'm wrapping variables with the curly brackets, double quote. So if we save everything now and preview it in a browser, refresh the page, now rather than having all these errors, we see no first name, no last name, because we obviously did this check first. We checked if it actually exists, and if it does, we return it. If it doesn't, we basically return the message. And that was the same for both basically first and last name. So that's the get name. Let's try another function. Function get town. There we go. And this one, with this one, we pretty much do the same thing, but because it's going to be just one super global variable, we're just going to check if, and then exclamation mark is set request, and we're looking for town variable. If it is set, rather than wrapping this within the brackets, I'm going to put it on the same line. We could also put it on a new line, but let's put it on the same line. Return no town available. And there we go. So if it's not set, if it does not exist, in other words, then return this label. Otherwise, and we're not using else statements, we can see again, because once this has been executed and it returned true, this condition, then we have return statement. And as I've mentioned earlier, once the return statement has been triggered within the function, nothing else in this function is executed. So what we put on the second line wouldn't ever be triggered anyway. But if it's going to be false, then this return statement will be ignored and we are going to get the next line. So on the next line, I'm simply returning the request again and request Superglobal, the variable which we're looking for is town again. So if it's not set, return no town available. If it is set, then we are going to simply return it. So what I'm going to do now is create another function. So function get user, and as you can see, we've got all three of these functions in a global scope. They are not inside of any other functions. They are straight into the first layer, as you may call it, of this file. So they are all in a global space, basically. So what I'm going to do now is check if, and then I'm going to use the exclamation mark is, sorry, we're not checking if it's set this time. We're simply checking if request does not exist. So simply exclamation mark before the request Superglobal. And if it isn't, meaning we haven't got any request in a URI, we haven't sent them through the post, or we haven't set them on the cookies, then we simply return missing Superglobal variable. But otherwise, what we're going to do is return get name function. As you can see, we are calling the function from the global scope. And then we are going to concatenate this with the result returned from the get town and semicolon at the end. So as you can see, we are now calling get name, get town. We are concatenating it with the comma and a space. So we've got full name and then comma, space, and the name of the town. So if we now save it, but rather than calling the get name, we are going to be calling the get user function. So we see what this is going to return. Refresh the page. Missing Superglobal because we haven't submitted the form with the post request. We haven't put any variables in the URI, and we haven't set any cookies. But if we change this, now we go for first name, and there we go. We got first name and last name in the URI. We have obviously our get name now returned my first name and last name, then comma, and unfortunately we haven't got a town, so it says no town available. But if we add this town, so end town, let's say Bristol, there we go, that's now been fetched from the URI. Let's now try and add the form and have with the same fields basically and submit it with the form using the post request. So if we go back to our editor, and after the echo get user, basically, let's close this PHP block, and we are going to create some HTML, basically the HTML form. So if I just create a few new lines and start with the form, and it's going to be with the method post, because that's the request we are trying to trigger here. And the first input will be of the type text, and it will have name first underscore name. Then we're going to have a placeholder just to give us some idea of what we are expecting to be placed, typed into this field. It's going to be first name, and then we're going to have a value. And for the value, what I'm going to do is use the PHP and echo sticky input. And what I'm going to pass as an argument to this function, we haven't got this function obviously yet, I'm going to pass the name of the input field, basically, which we are trying to get the sticky input for. So if I copy this and in between a single double quotes, just put it in. And what I'm going to do before I create another input, let's create quickly this sticky input function. I'm going to create it before this echo get user function here, where we're actually calling this function, the statement. So function sticky input, and we are looking for the index and perhaps a default value. If let's say we are fetching data from a database, you could probably put by default the value from a database, and then if someone updates it, obviously that could change. So default, by default it will be null. So two curly brackets, and we start with if, and we check if the post Superglobal is not available. In other words, the form has not been submitted yet. Then we return default. If it hasn't been submitted, if we haven't got a post Superglobal, then we return default. By default, it's going to be just null. And otherwise, return is set. We are checking post, and we're checking for the specific index that we are looking for. So if it's set, then we are simply going to return it. So post and then index. Otherwise, we are going to return null. So that's our sticky input. And as you can see now, it's obviously available here. And we obviously need to close this input tag. Now if I select everything and duplicate it, create another one, this one will be for the last name. So let's just quickly do this here. Name is going to be last name. And the same, obviously we need to pass this parameter for the sticky input, so that obviously the function knows which variable we are looking for. And then again, let's duplicate this one, and let's do the same for the town. So town and town here, obviously we need to change these placeholders as well. Last name, and this one will be town. Last input will be submit, so type submit, and the value will be simply submit, which is giving us the label for the button. Okay, if we save it and preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, there we go. We still have these variables in a URI. That's why we can see them above the form. As you can see, our placeholders tell us exactly what we need to type in. But what's going to happen now if I type something else? Let's say Mark, Spencer, and town, let's say London. And if we submit this form here now, even though we have these variables in the URI, there we go. Everything has been overwritten. And that's because obviously we're using the request Superglobal, which first checks for get, then checks for the post. But this is the order. So obviously if we first set our variables, Superglobal variables, with the get, and then with the post, obviously post has overwritten what we set with the get. That's why we're getting this result. And as you can see, after the form has been, the page has been reloaded on submit, this sticky input function has kept all these values that we typed in inside of the fields. If we didn't have this function, let's quickly go back and let's comment this echo here statement so that this function does not get triggered. If we save it, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, yes, we want to resubmit form. There we go, you can see we've lost our input. But this sticky input allows us to basically keep it obviously based on what this post Superglobal contains. So that's how we can obviously do it with the post, how the post is going to overwrite the get Superglobal. Let's have a look at another example.